So Camilla just got removed from hosting the garden party at the palace. And the real story isn't about a schedule change. It's that Charles finally drew a line after years of letting her believe she was untouchable. What happened in that room wasn't a logistical adjustment, it was a boundary, and the way it went down reveals fractures that go way deeper than anyone's admitting publicly. And you know what gets me? The palace keeps saying this was about tone and optics and ceremonial needs, but those words are doing so much heavy lifting they're practically buckling under the weight of what actually happened. Before we get into all of it, do me a favor and hit subscribe to Prime Archive so you don't miss any updates on this story, because trust me, this is still unfolding. Here's the thing that should make everyone pause. The hosting order had been reviewed more than once, long before the public schedule was complete. That's not speculation. That's from sealed palace documents William saw before Camilla ever knew it was coming. So while Camilla was moving through her days believing her position was secure, others were already questioning it behind closed doors. That means this wasn't born in panic after some dramatic blow-up. It had been discussed, considered, and approved in stages. Charles didn't snap. He calculated. And there's something almost colder about that, right? He sat at his desk, staring at the hosting list, and when he finally moved the pen, he knew exactly what he was doing. The hesitation mattered, though. One of the senior courtiers who was there said the king's hand slowed over her name before the pen moved. That pause is everything. It shows this wasn't a cold act. It was a costly one. Charles wasn't just changing a schedule, he was placing the crown's public shape above the comfort of his own household. So let's talk about what actually triggered this, because it wasn't the garden party itself. Days earlier, there was a private luncheon in the palace breakfast room meant to settle the order of greetings. And look, I know order of greetings sounds like the most boring thing imaginable, but in royal life, sequence becomes status, and status becomes power. The wrong placement can turn a polite afternoon into a silent declaration of who matters most. Everyone at that table understood the stakes. What they didn't expect was Camilla noticing that Catherine had been placed ahead of her in the receiving order for one segment of the event. Now, Catherine's positioning wasn't some random slight. William understood exactly what it signaled. It was about continuity, about steadying the future before thousands of eyes could study every movement. He spoke carefully, almost softly, asking that the order remain unchanged for the sake of the day. But Camilla heard something completely different. She heard displacement. She heard a younger figure being lifted while she was being asked to accept less. This is where it gets really uncomfortable. Camilla didn't explode. She questioned the placement with this tight calm that apparently made the room more uneasy than outright anger would have. Charles watched her tone sharpen, and according to people close to what happened, he felt that old fear rise again. Not fear of scandal, but fear that private tension was beginning to demand a public stage. Then she set down her teacup with such force that conversation just died. Everyone felt the fracture, nobody needed to name it. And then Camilla said the sentence that changed everything. She said, then perhaps the public should know who is really hosting this family. That's not a casual remark, that's a match struck near dry paper. Charles understood immediately that the garden party could no longer be trusted to remain ceremonial. It could become a confrontation dressed in smiles. Charles ended the luncheon without drama, but after everyone left, he asked the aides to step out and stayed alone with the hosting folder for nearly 10 minutes. When he finally called his private secretary back in, his choice had hardened. That luncheon became the point of no return. But what really sealed it came later, when several senior figures told Charles directly that the garden party could become a visible power struggle if the original plan remained unchanged. They feared tension would slip through the smiles, that guests would sense division, that cameras would catch what the palace tried to bury. Charles believed the danger was real. He wasn't punishing Camilla, he was protecting the monarchy from becoming a family argument in public. And honestly, that distinction matters. Punishment would mean she did something wrong. Protection means he thought she was a liability. The confrontation between Charles and Camilla when she finally learned the decision is the part that really gets me. She came looking for reassurance. Instead, she found a decision already made, a file already signed, and a man who would not retreat. Charles didn't even rise when she entered. He remained behind the desk, tired in a way that no crown could hide, with the revised hosting sheet placed between them like evidence. A palace study isn't just a private office. It's the kind of room where royal decisions are shaped before they become public reality. And this decision had already crossed that line. Camilla stood still for a moment as if refusing to accept the meaning of the paper. Then anger found her voice. She asked whether this was punishment, whether one sharp sentence at a luncheon had become enough to erase her from the center of a royal event. Charles looked at her with the exhaustion of a man who knew every answer would wound someone. He told her he wasn't punishing her, he was protecting the monarchy. The words were measured, but they landed hard because Camilla understood what they meant. He believed she was the danger. Her anger didn't disappear, it cracked. Beneath it came sadness, quiet and heavy. She had expected reassurance, perhaps even an apology. Instead, Charles wasn't asking for permission. He was telling her what would happen. The hosting plan had already been changed. And that matters enormously because royal order is never just order. It tells the public who carries trust, who carries influence, and who must step back when the institution demands it. Camilla had treated those hosting duties as proof that the long road of rejection, judgment, and whispered resistance had finally ended. To stand beside Charles was to be seen, accepted, and protected. So when he told her the arrangement had changed, the wound landed deeper than the words themselves. She had believed proximity to the throne meant protection. She learned that standing close to power is not the same as controlling it. Then came the question both of them had been avoiding. Camilla asked whether William had influenced Charles, and this is where it gets really telling. Charles paused. He did not give her a clean denial. He did not offer the comfort she wanted. The silence stretched long enough to become its own confession. In that silence, Camilla realized the decision was bigger than one garden party, bigger than one wounded pride, bigger even than Charles's refusal. Behind it stood a deeper question of who truly controlled royal presentation. And once Camilla understood that Charles was not acting alone in spirit, her focus shifted toward the hidden machinery of palace authority. That machinery is the part most people never see. Power inside the palace rarely announces itself. It moves through calendars, seating charts, reception lines, and names placed higher or lower on a page. The paper trail on this one is damning. The garden party hosting plan was controlled through royal secretaries, household officials, security advisors, and the king's final sign-off. Every greeting line, every arrival time, every assigned duty carried a message. Camilla had believed that message still placed her close to the center. The revised order told a different story. The revised hosting order limited which guests she could formally receive, cutting down her ceremonial visibility and narrowing the space where she could appear as a central figure. Then a second document surfaced inside the working file. It laid out contingency arrangements prepared in advance, proving the palace had expected resistance before Camilla ever challenged the decision. They were ready for her reaction. They had planned around it. That's not just cold, that's institutional. What makes this even more striking is that Camilla's name had also been removed from a short internal briefing prepared for garden party photographers and guest marshals. Those are the staff who guide guests and manage the flow of the day. Charles understood what that meant. The palace didn't only want her role reduced, it wanted no confusion over who would visibly lead the event. By the time the revised instructions reached the staff corridors, the palace was no longer preparing for a party. It was preparing for fallout. Staff members received the update with careful faces and even quieter voices. They were told to treat the change as final, not temporary, and to avoid discussing it beyond necessary protocol. Protocol meant the strict working rules that keep royal events controlled, from who stands where to who speaks first. But rules could not soften the meaning. Camilla's role had not been delayed. It had been reduced. The palace was not leaving room for negotiation, and that alone told every aide that Charles had crossed an emotional line he could not easily uncross. William's role in all of this is fascinating because he didn't behave the way you might expect. He didn't celebrate, he didn't push the decision further. When he entered later, guarded and quiet, the air changed again. He sensed what his father had already accepted. This removal could stop one public problem while opening a far more personal fracture. In a quiet corridor conversation, William spoke to an aide with controlled care, insisting the day had to remain dignified, not divided. He did not want triumph. He wanted control. He knew Camilla's reduced role would be studied by everyone who understood royal signals, and he also knew one wrong gesture could turn discipline into humiliation. William understood that public duties sometimes demanded a private wound, but he also knew wounds inside a royal family rarely stayed hidden forever. The private conversation between Charles and William after the decision is where the emotional truth of this whole situation really lands. Charles called William in after the revised hosting order had been completed, and that invitation carried a weight. Both men understood. This was not another official briefing. The hosting order had become something far more personal. It had forced Charles to choose between the peace of his own marriage and the public stability of the monarchy. Charles admitted he had waited too long to correct the tension, too long to believe that silence could manage what pride had already sharpened. He knew Camilla would feel wounded, and that mattered because her place beside him had always been more than ceremonial. It had been proof of survival, proof that years of rejection had finally given way to acceptance. Removing her from the center of the garden party didn't only change a schedule, it struck at the meaning she had built around that role. William listened with careful restraint. He did not look pleased. He did not treat Camilla's removal as a victory. Instead, he answered with the quiet force of someone who had watched the pressure build for years. He told Charles that correction only felt this painful because the silence had lasted too long. Those words landed hard, but they weren't cruel. Charles then revealed the fear that had driven him. He believed the garden party could become a public symbol of competing influence if he allowed the original plan to stand. Guests would notice, staff would sense it, the palace would smile, but the fracture would breathe underneath every greeting. William promised he would not exploit the decision because the monarchy could not survive if private victories became public trophies. Charles looked at his son and saw, not triumph, but that changed the emotional direction of the day. William saw the monarchy choose discipline, and he understood what the future would demand: control, discipline, and refusal to let private conflict command public duty. But here's where the palace lost control of the narrative completely. By morning, the palace no longer owned the story. The public did. What began as a private hosting decision became a national spectacle, stripped of soft language and placed beneath unforgiving headlines. The palace response was brief, careful, and cold, describing the garden party arrangements as a reflection of the king's wishes and the ceremonial needs is doing a lot of work. It means the public-facing duties that keep royal events orderly, dignified, and loyal to the crown's image. But the explanation didn't calm the storm. It sharpened it. Viewers understood that when the palace used clean language, it often meant something far messier had happened behind closed doors. Camilla watched the coverage from a private room, and every word seemed to remove her all over again. The screen showed older moments where she had hosted with confidence, standing beside Charles as if her place had finally become unquestioned. Then the story cut back to the new arrangement, and the contrast was merciless. She turned away before the segment ended. She had endured public judgment before, but this was different. This was not a scandal from the outside. This was the palace itself changing her position, then asking her to endure the meaning in silence. Charles watched another news segment without speaking. His jaw tightened as broadcasters framed the decision as a rare visible correction inside the royal household, focusing on his authority and Camilla's sudden absence from the hosting center. He knew the truth was more painful than the coverage allowed. He had acted to prevent public embarrassment, yet the attempt to stop one wound had opened another. Then came the image that sealed the public mood. A major newspaper front page showed a wide palace garden photograph with an empty marked space beside Charles under the headline, "The King Hosts Alone." Those 4 words landed like judgment. Outside Buckingham Palace gates, a crowd gathered, not wild or chaotic, but watchful. Visitors pointed at the front page, speaking in low voices about what Camilla's absence meant and whether this was a correction, a warning, or a quiet fall from favor. Charles understood that headlines could explain nothing fully. Camilla understood they could still wound deeply. She walked away from Charles with the kind of control that only made the wound clearer. She did not argue in the corridor. She did not demand another audience. She simply moved behind the nearest door and let the silence swallow what pride refused to show. The emotional aftermath inside the palace is where the real cost becomes visible. Camilla sat alone after leaving him, removing her gloves slowly and placing them on a side table as if accepting the humiliation piece by piece. The queen consort had survived years of judgment, but this felt different. This came from inside the walls. This came from the man whose approval had once shielded her from the coldest parts of royal life. Her sadness did not arrive loudly. It settled heavily because she understood that public grace often demands private pain. Charles remained in his study after the conversation, staring at the closed door long after she had gone. The king was torn between personal loyalty and royal discipline, and neither side offered comfort. He had protected the event, but wounded the person closest to him. The garden party continued under the revised hosting order, the approved plan deciding which royal figure receives guests and where each person stands during the event. That order mattered because royal life speaks through placement. Camilla no longer led the ceremonial welcome, and the king carried that decision in public, smile after smile, knowing the private pain behind it had not faded. Camilla remained dignified, but dignity did not erase the wound. She understood now that her removal was not a passing embarrassment or a temporary adjustment. It was a boundary drawn by Charles himself. The palace presented calm on the surface, but the altered arrangement made the message unmistakable. Royal duty had been placed above personal expectation. For Camilla, that truth was harder than any headline. The verdict on this is clearer than any palace statement will ever admit. Charles chose duty over comfort. William watched the crown protect itself with painful precision. The monarchy survived the day by sacrificing ease for order. The garden party ended, the gates closed, and the message remained unmistakable. The crown had spoken, and even those closest to it had to obey. William's quiet presence made the shift impossible to miss. The prince did not need victory, and he did not seek applause. His restraint showed what the future would demand. William saw that the monarchy could survive pain, but not confusion. Charles saw it too, even as the cost settled heavily between him and Camilla. When Charles stepped into the day with a calm face and a heavy heart, he knew every greeting would be watched, every pause examined, every absence measured against the story already burning outside the gates. He had made the call. And Camilla, for all her years of fighting to stand beside him, found herself standing aside while the institution moved forward.